Introduction. It was Sunday night in downtown Toronto, many years ago. The preacher with a narrow mustache moved to the pulpit. He first flexed his bony shoulders, as always, and then started in. Down below, I was stretched out on a hard, creaky pew between my mom and dad, and slept right through the sermon. As it turned out, that may have been the last time the mystic A.W. Tozer ever preached. He passed away shortly after that. Later on, I got to see his private upstairs study in his narrow little house where he used to lay face down on the floor to pray and place his nose on a handkerchief to protect his lungs from rug dust. I treasure the memory of a man who once loaned me a big picture book of birds. Cardinals in bold red, exquisite little bluebirds, Baltimore Orioles flaunting orange and black to the glory of God, and stunning yellow goldfinches, an extravagance of color and a fascination the great man and a little boy happened to share. But ever since that night, when I may have slept through Tozer's last sermon, I have felt a sympathetic kinship to Eutychus. Acts 20, verse 9. It was a gift of providence that A.W. Tozer entered the life of our family many decades ago. My dad had been a pastor on the verge of burnout and spiritual exhaustion. Tozer pointed out a new pathway forward and directed him toward the real supernatural presence and resources necessary to sustain a vibrant ministry. The time-worn old cliches were not enough, but Tozer marched to the beat of a different drummer, and we have all been changed for the better through his influence. I believe the same is possible for any and all who study this little book, which he so aptly titled The Pursuit of God. Tozer, the author. A fire broke out on Tozer family farm near Newburgh in rural western Pennsylvania. It spread quickly, and in the chaos that ensued, the entire farmhouse burned to the ground. The tragedy marked a pivotal point in the family's history. Before long, for this and other reasons, the farm had to be abandoned. The family packed up and moved further west to Akron, Ohio. There, some of them found employment in a Goodyear rubber factory. A.W. Tozer, 1897 to 1963, a son born on that farm, was just 10 years old at the time of the fire. We can only speculate that the event left a permanent impression on his heart and mind. Throughout his later life, he instinctively viewed the things of this world as passing and impermanent. And in their place, he turned his gaze upward to what was enduring and eternal. Tozer was converted to Christ as a teenage factory worker in 1915. He soon joined the Christian and Missionary Alliance, a holiness denomination that became his lifelong church home. Near the end of World War II, he served for a brief stint in the United States Army. Early on in his Christian life, he had sensed a call to pastoral ministry. In 1919, despite a lack of theological training, he accepted his first pastoral appointment, a little congregation in Stonewood, West Virginia, near Nutter Fort. Other pastorates followed in Morgantown, West Virginia, then in Indianapolis. These led him eventually to Chicago's South Side, 1928 to 1959, and finally to Toronto, Canada, 1959 to 1963. He lived his entire life in this Midwestern region of North America, never more than 600 miles from his rural birthplace. A.W. Tozer had only limited formal education. In fact, he quit school altogether at age 15 to help his financially struggling family. But he was gifted intellectually and developed these gifts through a lifetime of diligent reading and self-directed study. He never celebrated ignorance or disdained wisdom and expertise as ways of saving face. Years later, he would advise young people, get all the education you can. Then forget you have it and let God use you. Temperamentally, he was reclusive, reflective, and poetic. He was especially drawn to the writings of 14th and 15th century Christian mystics and 17th century quietists like François Fenelon and Madame Guyon. He recognized them as kindred spirits and soul friends. With their help, he came to discover the exquisite experience of beholding God's beauty with adoration and delight. Some of these spiritual writers were already known in his Holiness Church tradition, but he discovered the majority of them on his own while browsing used bookstores. He absorbed their visions and then, with a uniquely engaging style, passed along his discoveries to others. He spoke reprovingly to a conservative Protestant community that had become, in his judgment, largely disconnected from the presence of God. His legacy was to reconnect such conservative evangelicals with larger ecumenical streams of Christian spirituality, and to prod Bible-centered Christians to pursue the God who dwells beyond the sacred page. A modern spiritual classic. In 1959, someone asked Tozer to recommend some spiritual classics. He responded with a list of 35. The Inquirer then posed a follow-up question. What books since 1900 are likely to become classics? Tozer replied, if I might venture a pure guess, the answer would be none. At the time, neither he nor his Inquirer were aware that a legitimate candidate for modern spiritual classic was emerging right in front of them. Tozer's own The Pursuit of God, published just 11 years earlier. A story circulated about how this little book came to be. If the account is reliable, the writing started in earnest one evening as Tozer embarked on an all-night train ride from Chicago down to Texas. A burst of creative energy, aided by a little tea and toast, sustained him in his railroad compartment the whole night through. By morning, as the train pulled into the station, the book was basically complete. Tozer was a prolific spiritual writer, and later in this volume, we offer recommendations for further reading of his works. But The Pursuit of God is a natural gateway to the rest of his writings. The little volume breathes a holy discontent with the merely formal and superficial aspects of organized Christianity. In their place, it offers hope of actually beholding and delighting in God in all his glory. It tantalizes readers with the possibility of replacing external religiosity with direct encounter with the wondrous presence of God. Tozer's aim was to win over readers' hearts to the core truth that only God himself can fully satisfy our deepest soul longings. It was certainly so for Tozer himself. His goal in life, and the one he commended to others, was the quiet, adoring contemplation of God's magnificent splendor. This was the experience that evoked his reverence and stimulated the transformation of his gazing soul. It remains a great mystery how, in such moments, God comes to us in clear and self-authenticating ways. The Christian's adoring gaze prepares a place of meeting, of real encounter. Tozer believed that we were made for this, that the pursuit of God is therefore our highest purpose and the secret to our fulfillment. Did this make Tozer a mystic? Well, this depends, of course, on how the term is defined. If a mystic means someone who disdains our God-given reason, or who exalts private subjective experience over the truths revealed in Holy Scripture, Tozer was not one. We know that he loved the Scriptures. He immersed himself in its pages. Words, phrases, and stories from the Bible flooded his mind at every turn. However, if a mystic is understood in the classic Christian sense as someone who seeks and enjoys above all else the real presence of God in their lives, then Tozer definitely was a mystic. And as he elsewhere explained, any Christian who claims a personal relationship with Jesus Christ must already be at least a little bit of a mystic. The only remaining question is how much we will choose to lean into this incredible privilege and possibility. It is natural and normal for readers to ask, what is such an experience of God actually like? Here, like so many other Christian mystics, Tozer declined to offer much detail. He insists that such encounters cannot adequately be described secondhand. You have to experience them for yourself. The best he could do was point you in the right direction. Nevertheless, the pursuit of God contains a hint or two. Repeatedly, Tozer mentions the sweetness and even the piercing sweetness of the believer's experience of the love of Christ. Those who have walked closely with God will certainly have some sense of what he was talking about. Tozer never offered any slick 3, 5, and 7-step programs for achieving this spiritual goal. In his mind, there should be no rigid templates or detailed manuals for pursuing God. He believed that if our hearts keep right, such things will more or less take care of themselves. Instead, the pivotal issue for him was always the intensity of the seeking Christian's longing for God. The Christian's level of desire is the thing upon which everything else turns. And so, Tozer's personal mission was to inspire and deepen such holy longing in others, and to point them toward the one true source of soul satisfaction. The pursuit of God focuses primarily on identifying and meeting the preconditions of such satisfying encounters with God. For starters, Tozer explains that it requires an ardent pursuit of God, for he does not give himself to the casual seeker. It also requires a corresponding detachment from all other less worthy and distracting affections. Tozer reinforced this point by using the difficult, bracing, yet thoroughly biblical imagery of dying to self-love and self-interest. The price may be high, but the prize is worth it. One thing he believed is certain: such a pursuit requires a hard shift in the orientation of every soul. It involves refocusing away from oneself and toward God in self-forgetful adoration. Here, Tozer took up his pen to attempt the impossible, to lay out the attributes of God that ought to evoke a burning adoration and delight in him. But his effort here is far too brief, and I suspect Tozer knew it. Later on in life, he would describe the God he had come to adore in considerably more detail in The Knowledge of the Holy, 1961. He was able to evoke a compelling vision of God with much greater success. Still, Tozer realized that we dare not settle for God being a mere logical inference from evidence. That kind of religion is seriously deficient and can never sustain us for very long. One of the great deceptions of Tozer's time and ours is the notion that God is far off and detached from our reality, basically hidden and virtually inaccessible. Tozer countered such a distorted view of reality by reminding us that God is always and everywhere fully present, and closer to us than our own breath. Moreover, He is not a God who prefers His own privacy, but is constantly reaching out to us in loving efforts to communicate. God continues to speak in the here and now, so that it will be to our great advantage to learn the long-forgotten disciplines of becoming still, of listening, and eventually hearing His voice with unmistakable clarity. In some ways, the concluding sections of The Pursuit of God are among the most powerful. There we learn that faith is the continuous gaze of the soul upon a saving God. Such inward beholding looks out instead of in. And by this means Christians are able to escape their chronic self-centeredness. Among other things, such a reorientation dramatically alters Christians' motivation. Tozer depicts this newer posture in life as meekness, that is, as one characterized by a restful soul no longer driven by personal ambition or a need to impress others. When we get this right, we will care less about what people think of us as long as God is pleased. A criticism often registered against those who intently pursue God is that they become so heavenly minded that they are no earthly good. This should not and need not be so. Tozer reminds us that the ordinary moments and mundane tasks of our lives are never to be treated as wastes of time. The pursuit of God does not permit us to dismiss such duties as unimportant, for there is a sacred quality to the everyday aspects of life. We were created as earthlings. This world is precisely where our spiritual service is to be rendered. This is where we have been called to commune with God and to be pleasing to Him. The significance of the work. A defining feature of a spiritual classic is that it will have a long shelf life of usefulness. The Pursuit of God certainly qualifies. Since its publication in 1948, it has been enormously influential, especially within conservative, evangelical, and fundamentalist circles. One good reason for this is that its author belonged to these same circles. With his wife, he raised a family on a tight budget. He rode the bus. He even followed the fortunes of the Chicago Cubs baseball team. He was different from ancient spiritual writers who lived in faraway places. In so many ways, he was one of us. The Christian faith involves believing that certain things are true. It also involves behaving in certain ways that are good. But the pursuit of God reminds us that there is more to the Christian faith than just believing and behaving, essential as both of these are. There must also be a relational dimension, an aspect of real meeting, of actual encounter with the living God. Indeed, such genuine connection to God is the sustaining supply line for an enduring faith and life of service. To underscore this point, Tozer quoted the great evangelist John Wesley. Orthodoxy, or right opinion, is at best a very slender part of religion. This comment has been taken by some people to mean that our beliefs are relatively unimportant when it comes to the spiritual life. Nothing could be further from the truth. The martyrs of the Christian faith died for their convictions, not their feelings. And the early church left us notable declarations of beliefs. This makes us want what others have. Holy envy is a good kind of envy. The intent of writers like Tozer is less to explain everything to us and more to light a fire of desire for what they have experienced and what might be possible for us as well. A.W. Tozer's final exhortation would surely be, press on to experience for yourself that to which the Christian mystics have given consistently winsome testimony. Make such lived experience of our loving, magnificent God your own. When all is said and done, here with Him you will find your true and enduring home.